The initial stake pool offering is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. It's probably just going to keep getting bigger and keep evolving. Ready? Let's go. We had a whole discussion over a month and a half ago about initial stake pool offerings when Sunday Swap was first talking about it. But lately, ISPOs or ISOs, however you want to abbreviate that, has become a super hot topic, and this is unlikely to be the last of it. Before we get to that, be aware, Daedalus now allows Project Catalyst voting registration on both Ledger and Trezor. Same thing for the Yoroi extension. This is the schedule to register to vote in Project Catalyst Fund 5. You can register in between right now and the 19th of July. So there is now no excuse to not have your ADA on a hardware wallet. I do not want to hear anybody a year from now talking about how they lost their life savings, whether that's $1,000 or $90,000, whatever amount would hurt for you to lose. I don't want to hear anybody talking about how they lost that amount because somehow they didn't have a hardware wallet. A Ledger Nano S, which apparently I just read that that's the most popular hardware wallet in the world. A Ledger Nano S is still only $59. It's $59. You can find a link in the description box below. Super easy. They will ship it to you directly from Ledger from France. The shipping is surprisingly speedy, at least in my case, it always has been. So here it is. Here's what's got everybody all up in arms. The stake pools associated with Meld. And we're not really going to talk about the individual merits of the Meld project. That's not really what we do on this channel. We don't pick investments for anybody. We just talk about technology and goings on in the Cardano ecosystem. Because I think it is an amazing ecosystem, but we're not in the business of picking investments. We don't provide financial advice or investment advice. So we're just going to look at the model here, but there's some interesting things going on. So Meld now looks like, according to adapools.org, they have 4 pools. And look at this. Look at this. 2 of the pools are nearly saturated. We've got one at 63.48, one at 60.82 million ADA. They've got 2 additional ones at 22.75 and 21. So we've got a lot of ADA already delegated to these pools. It's pretty interesting. So in 3 of these pools, we can see over here in this column, Meld is keeping 99% of the rewards. In another pool, they're keeping 50%. So what's going on in this pool, they are rewarding their delegators with 50% ADA and 50% other things. In these other pools, they're keeping all the ADA and rewarding their delegators with 100% other things. And those other things in this case are tokens related to the Meld project. So, of course, all the small stake pool operators are very alarmed and dismayed by this. I have a lot of compassion for the small stake pool operators. They have a hard task if they just have those technical skills, which makes them a great stake pool operator, but not the marketing skills. They are having a rough go of it. And we talked about all of this back on May 20th. We talked all about the initial stake pool offering model back when Sunday Swap first started talking about it. I believe we kind of predicted at the time. It seemed apparent to me, at least, that the initial stake pool offering model was just going to get bigger and bigger, and it was going to evolve into other things. In fact, I kind of speculated at the time that we might end up with things even as sophisticated as sort of index funds of projects on Cardano represented in the ISO model. You would have stake pools giving not just like Meld tokens in this case, but you might have a stake pool giving tokens from multiple different projects so that you have a veritable index fund of projects in Cardano. I still think that could be on the way. I think this thing's going to evolve and it's going to get more and more sophisticated, more and more complicated, because this is a novel means of capital formation. And just like we talked about before, one of the most novel things about it is that you're not risking your principal. You're just risking your rewards. And that's real money. I'm not belittling the value of the rewards in Cardano. In fact, I personally appreciate them very much. However, it's very different. Instead of buying tokens with principal, instead of having to trade in a chunk of your Cardano, your ADA, to get your hands on some Meld tokens, you're just handing over your future rewards. And this isn't the only place where Meld is talking about doing interesting things. If you watch the appearance of Ken Oling from Meld on the Cardano Live podcast, you might have heard him mention crypto loans with a negative 1% interest rate and this thing called a Genius loan. When you go to their white paper, you can read Genius loan, following the idea of extreme innovation, Meld will be offering a self-repaying loan. And I'm not presenting any of this as fact. This is just my understanding based on a very quick cursory read of this part of the white paper. So you can imagine how all that's going to work. One thing to note about these crypto-backed loans, and this is not really necessarily anything specific to Meld. This is just sort of across the DeFi space. I think people who listen to this channel, who watch these videos, kind of know that I'm not like ultra excited about the DeFi space. And it's because I already know how a lot of these things work I've already sort of been exposed to how these things work in the legacy systems. And a lot of these products seem to be similar in some ways to what was already going on in a legacy system. For example, a lot of these crypto-backed loans, the way they work is something I encountered in my professional career about 15 years ago, and that's stock loans. So about 15 years ago, I was, first sort of encountering, right around that time, the way stock loans work in the regular legacy equities world. And it's very reminiscent of this section of the white paper. They say loans are issued at a loan-to-value ratio of 50%. If the collateral value falls to a loan-to-value ratio of 65% or stays above 50% for more than 3 days, a margin call happens. The customer must provide additional collateral to bring the loans back to an LTV of 50%. The same happens if the LTV reaches 75%. If the LTV reaches 85%, a liquidation event is triggered and the collateral is converted to USD or Euro stablecoins, equivalent to the fiat loan plus a 5% fee. The balance is then transferred back to the customer, and the smart contract terminates. The customer keep the fiat they borrowed. So if you wrap your head around what that means, there's a threshold. If you don't exceed the threshold, everything's good. But if you go into this little band, all of a sudden things start happening. You either get a margin call where you have to put additional collateral into the loan, or you could even get liquidated. If you get liquidated, all of your collateral is converted to a stable coin and the loan is over. So you need to be careful. I know a lot of people sort of become borrowers in these crypto loans, just like they did back in the day in stock loans, because they want to access some liquidity in their holdings without disposing of their holdings. But you got to be careful. You might get margin called and you might not be able to produce the additional collateral. You might get liquidated. If the market is moving very, very fast, you might get liquidated at a price you do not want to get liquidated at. What if it's a flash crash? What if it's a really quick flash, the price goes down, you get liquidated, and the price immediately comes back up? You're going to be pissed. You're going to be pissed. So you need to be careful. And again, we're not talking about any particular project here. We're just talking about those types of stock loans and crypto-backed loans in general. If you're the borrower, if you're considering becoming a borrower on one of these to access the liquidity in your holdings, you need to be aware of these types of provisions that can trigger margin calls or liquidations. These are significant things you need to be aware of. Having said that, the Cardano space has definitely taken note of how successful Meld has been in attracting delegators to their 4 pools here. There are going to be more projects. I believe there are going to be more projects doing exactly this. People see this is a tremendous dollar value of ADA that has been delegated to these pools, and it's going to be a pretty phenomenally successful capital formation tool for Meld. It would have been quite a feat for any project in Cardano to raise funds this quickly, I'm going to use the word effortlessly, although I'm sure they would argue that there was a ton of effort behind the scenes that we don't see from their development team and others. But this has been very successful. Let's put it that way. And I still think we're in for a much wilder ride with these ISPOs. I still think we're going to have things that start looking a little bit like index funds, where it's not just one token, it's many tokens that you're rewarded with, and the stake pool is taking a similar 99% or 100% margin. I think if we get there to that index fund place, we might also start encountering governance of the actual stake pool by the delegators. Maybe we'll have DAOs that are directing the basket of projects that are in the index fund. Maybe going along with the video we did yesterday about SingularityNet, maybe you'll even have some of these DAOs purchasing AI tools from the SingularityNet AI marketplace to constantly manage and reshuffle the index. I mean, those are just things that are apparent now. Like, all of these things could take place. I'm not saying they will, but I think it's very possible any of these things could take place. You could have a project come along and say, hey, we're going to have the index fund stake pool. We're going to invest in 55 different Cardano projects. And we've also, acquired the services of this AI tool from SingularityNet that will use artificial intelligence or machine learning to manage and balance the portfolio of companies in the index fund. I think any of these things could be possible. It's pretty wild and a little bit exciting to think about. However, there's often a however on these things. Something else we've talked about quite frequently in the past is that these very exciting, cutting edge, innovative things that we're probably going to see in Cardano might also be on a collision course with US regulators. Inconveniently for the entire crypto space, US regulators, the Securities and Exchange Commission in particular, have a very expansive definition of a security. And it all goes back to SEC versus WJ Howie, a 1946 case. That's how antiquated this base concept is. We're talking about 1946, guys. And the language that the entire securities world has revolved around basically since then is this: a person invests his money in a common enterprise and is led to expect profits solely from the efforts of the promoter or a third party. So, and there's a whole line of case law that followed this, that addresses sort of the definition of the word money there. But unfortunately, if someone invests something of value in a common enterprise and they are thinking that they're going to experience profits from the efforts of someone else, it's very easy for that whole arrangement to fall into the definition of a security. So the defenses to a characterization that you're a security are usually, the defenses by people accused of this are usually pretty predictable. The first thing they go after is it wasn't money that was invested. And that's probably going to be a prime suspect for a lot of stake pools who might engage in the initial stake pool offering. They'll say it wasn't money. It was just the rights to collect their delegation rewards. Like I said, though, the case law that defines that definition that came after this 1946 case, the case law that defines that word is pretty expansive. If you read through those cases, just as a lay person, you're going to find some pretty expansive language that covers a lot of things of value. Usually the very next thing they go to is, hey, we are not based in the US. We are based on some other continent like Asia, and none of this should apply to us. Unfortunately, we know that just being in Asia alone does not shield you from US regulators. Here is Arthur Hayes, an original crypto guy. He's been around forever. I think Charles has even talked about him from back in the day on his AMAs. Back in April, I think it was, April, I believe, Arthur Hayes had to surrender to the FBI office in Hawaii. He ran BitMEX, which, despite a lot of people's misunderstandings, was never a Mexican Bitcoin exchange. It was never a Bitcoin exchange like based out of Mexico. It was the Bitcoin Mercantile Exchange. The MEX was not from Mexico. It was a mercantile exchange. And it looks like Arthur Hayes was living in Singapore. And I always kind of understood the BitMEX to be based out of Hong Kong, and maybe that's where the corporate entity was actually domiciled. But eventually, the U.S. regulators got after Arthur Hayes, and he had to fly to Hawaii and surrender himself to an FBI office. Of course, there's an important missing detail here. What was/is Arthur Hayes actually accused of? So we can Google Arthur Hayes BitMEX here, and we have a people also ask Google section, what happened to Arthur Hayes? And there's a response from Bloomberg here, or a piece of a Bloomberg article that says a Singapore resident, Hayes on Tuesday surrendered to U.S. authorities in Hawaii 6 months after federal prosecutors in New York accused him and his BitMEX co-founders of conspiring to skirt U.S. laws. Basically, they did not implement money laundering controls, which means they did not KYC their customers sufficiently or engage in other AML, anti-money laundering stuff. So his big crime was he didn't do the AML KYC stuff. That was a big crime. You probably know, if you were around in those days, the Bitcoin Mercantile Exchange that he was running was the big futures place. There were big futures contracts there, and the CFTC was always kind of signaling that they weren't cool with it. And I think, if I remember right, there were even times when I believe Americans who were trying to use those futures contracts or BitMEX, I believe you actually had a VPN in. I think they were even blocking American ISPs, but I think that either the feds are going after him for the period before they were blocking American addresses, or just for the fact that they might have known that Americans were using VPNs to access BitMEX. So, given that history, once you're aware of that history, you have to start asking yourself, how do you do KYC AML stuff in a stake pool context? I don't recall Yoroi or Daedalus ever asking me for the kinds of KYC details that I would expect from a normal financial institution. So it seems like it's probably going to be a pretty high hurdle for any project accepting delegation from Americans to say they somehow fall outside the jurisdiction of the SEC. If Arthur Hayes fell into the jurisdiction of the federal regulators, not necessarily the SEC, but even just the CFTC, if he fell into that net, I think it's actually kind of a high hurdle for stake pool operators who may be distributing these tokens that may be securities. I think it's going to be pretty. There are some hurdles there. There's some challenges to convince yourself that there might not be some regulatory hurdles there. We've talked about it before, but if it is deemed that you are selling securities and you are selling them to Americans, or you are in the U.S., you've basically got, largely, you can say that there are two things that need to happen: either a registration with the SEC or an exemption. And man, when you register with the SEC and you're selling those securities, there is a crazy amount of disclosure. And so far, just as a passive observer in the crypto scene, whenever there are things being sold to kind of crypto consumers, crypto investors, I usually look at the amount of disclosure they provide, and I would say by and large, there is so much missing disclosure that would normally be required by the SEC if these were securities. It's silly. Over here we have a prospectus. You can see that's quite a bit of disclosure. This is just the stock photo they used in Wikipedia here of a prospectus, there is not that much disclosure with a lot of crypto projects. I would say if the SEC came along and said, hey, these are securities, and it looks to us like you're selling them to US citizens, that there might be a silly amount of disclosure missing on a lot of these projects. Regardless of how you might feel about that regulatory piece we just outlined, I think we're just going to see more and more stake pools relying on models that look a lot like this initial stake pool offering model, because it's such a novel means of capital formation. I don't think this is the last we're going to see of this. I think there's a very good chance this will get regulated. What will happen to projects that are engaging in it? Who knows? I think the way the staking is working in Cardano and the way it works with the addition of this initial stake pool offering, I think the people involved in Cardano and doing some of these things are probably happy right now, or they should probably be happy for all the hate that Cardano is getting. Because if not, I think a lot of the Bitcoin and Ethereum maximalists would already be running Cardano stake pools. I think the Cardano staking thing is that powerful that if not for their intense hatred for the Cardano ecosystem, they would probably already be running Cardano stake pools. And another thing to think about in the context of staking is that smart contracts are not running in Cardano yet. And I say this because once smart contracts are running, you're going to have DeFi competing with all the stake pools for ADA. A certain percentage of the people are going to choose to lock up their ADA in various DeFi projects. And even though that does fit in with the lobster trap theme, I mean, there are going to be some DeFi projects that go bad. They, just like in Ethereum, some of them are probably going to lose the keys. Some of them are going to get hacked. Some of them, there might be, rug pulls on governance tokens that people lobster trapped themselves with. All those things are probably going to happen. Despite that, people are going to lock up some amount of ADA in DeFi projects. So the competition for stake pool operators now, I mean, they're up in arms about the initial stake pool offering activities right now. And it looks like in a few months, they're going to have to be competing with a whole bunch of DeFi projects that are going to be locking up a bunch of ADA. And they're probably going to be competing unless that regulatory collision happens quickly. They're probably going to be competing with initial stake pool offerings. So the competition for stake pools is just going to get more and more intense as the ISPO model evolves and flourishes, as DeFi starts coming online. So we're going to see a lot of things happening in the staking scene in the next several months, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. Talk to you tomorrow.